Introducing you to people across North Carolina and around the world who put their Catholic faith into action. This is FaithWorks on Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio. Now, here's your host for FaithWorks, Ellen White.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. Our show highlights individuals through God's grace who put their faith into action daily. Amazing people who have an interesting, sometimes overlooked, impact on our Catholic faith. On FaithWorks, we share their stories. I'm your host, Ellen White. What if the line between faith and science isn't a divide, but a bridge? What if the most mysterious relics of Christianity, like the Shroud of Turin or Eucharistic miracles, aren't just devotional objects, but signs pointing us to something and someone far beyond this world? Today, we're diving deep into what I'm calling God's fingerprints, scientific signs of the supernatural in the modern age. We'll explore the most rigorously studied miracles in Christian history, not just as apologetic proofs, but as profound revelations of God's presence, where reason and wonder meet. And there's no better guide for this journey than today's guest, Father Robert Spitzer, Jesuit priest, physicist, philosopher, and founder of the Magis Center. He's spent decades defending the harmony of science and faith and helping people see that belief in God isn't just reasonable, it's reality. Buckle up. We're going from blood types to quantum theory, from relics to resurrection. This is the kind of conversation that could change the way you see the world and the Eucharist forever. Welcome back, Father Spitzer. It's an honor.
Great to be back with you again, Ellen.
Oh, my goodness. And, for those that aren't familiar with you, I'd be very surprised because you've certainly blessed us with your presence here and taught us so much in the diocese. So we're grateful for your teaching. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll start with the hunger for signs. Father Spitzer, why do you think, even in our secular age, people still hunger for signs or miracles? What does that tell us about the human heart?
Well, there's two reasons. I mean, normally, intellectual conversion does precede spiritual and moral conversion,
okay,
because, we're reasonable people.
Right.
So, there's an internal critical sense within us that just basically says we don't want to be dragged along a path of naivete. Mm-hmm. And we've got a culture, a very secularized culture, that basically is accusing Christians and religious people of being naive all the time, right? So you got to be on your game, and you have to be able to provide some kind of rational basis. Our young people feel the pressure, very much because, they're challenged, every week, every day sometimes about their faith, if they have it or manifest it publicly. In fact, many of them are just too scared to manifest it. And, when they do, half the time it's because they're getting ready to disaffiliate. So you think to yourself, well, gosh, that's pretty bleak. If we don't present some evidence for
mm-hmm.
For the faith, they can't maintain their own faith, their own critical sense, and they can't defend their faith against people who are accusing them and the Catholic group they belong to, is being naive. And so you got to come up with something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, in a lot of cultures, in the Roman culture of Augustine's day, certainly intellectual conversion preceded spiritual moral conversion. Certainly in the day of St. Thomas Aquinas, we see the same thing. And now today, we are in a very secularized domain. We're not just competing against Romans and Muslims. We are competing against atheism on a kind of a grand scale. And so we do have to, push it out there. But luckily, God is giving us huge amounts of evidence from, near-death experiences, the Shroud of Turin, Eucharistic miracles, Marian miracles, now all the new cosmological evidence. I mean, it's amazing what's going on. And so it's out there. All we have to do is convey it. And, I'm even creating a Magis AI app right now that anyone, any kid, any teacher, any priest, anybody who wants, it's a free download starting on September 30th on Google Play Store and Apple Store, or you can just download it and it'll answer just about any question on science and reason and faith, scripture, morality, and spiritual life. So any confluence between all those things, it should answer about 10,000 questions.
Yeah,
this is going to help.
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea, Father. And how do you keep it from saying things that are contrary to the faith, especially with it being an AI?
You have to absolutely curate your database.
Right.
So I just started with my 20 books and my Faith and Science Study Bible. I also curated with, I've got some very high-end articles we have an advanced version and we have a simplified version. And so they can get either one, depending on their level, and get the answers to their questions. But you really have to curate your database. You have to control it. You can't let the AI simply go zooming around and probing in the internet.
Okay.
I mean, it'll come up, as you know, with just about anything.
Just about anything.
But I have people ask me that question all the time. They go, well, gee whiz, what's wrong with just using ChatGPT? You have no idea what algorithm they're using, and most of them are very much oriented toward a secular answer. So, and definitely in the moral area, definitely oriented toward the secular area.
Absolutely.
So you have to be pretty careful what you do. But we have curated the database, and we do have very good guardrails about any kind of probing of the internet. We don't really allow it for just about anything. We basically control our database completely. So we're very confident we can give very Orthodox Catholic answers and very good contemporary scientific and philosophical, rational answers, historical answers to people's questions.
I'm thinking, Father, that you're giving words here that are going to be in the new words of this year for the dictionary, curated and guardrails as it relates to the AI app. So we will definitely have to have you back on. This is certainly not what I intended to talk about at the beginning of our interview.
Sorry.
No, but it's good. I mean, this is great, and it's going to be a wonderful tool to have, and good for you for staying, kind of at the front end of this instead of playing catch up. But, back to my initial question about why it's necessary. And, especially now, I ran into a young man who's 30 something at daily mass a couple of weeks ago and was so encouraged by his response. But I'm getting the impression, too, that there's a big shift. And I can't help but think of, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. So we are inundated with wonderful bits of information about the beauty of our church and the hunger for truth. But he said the term was sheeple. He just kept looking at people that were going to daily mass or, at church, raised Catholic, as sheeple. And then he heard an interview on Joe Rogan with Jordan Peterson, and that's what he needed to open up that little bitty crack. And he's been on this journey for about a year now. So, I mean, God uses everything. But
absolutely. And, I don't have to tell you that Jordan Peterson has opened that crack for a lot of young men and really brought them along in a way that, they can more or less follow without feeling like, they're being pushed.
Right.
But, eventually they're going to get to the point where they need some concrete evidence.
Yes.
And whether you give it to them from cosmology or near-death experience studies or, the Eucharistic miracles, you're going to have to give it to them. Because if you don't, you'll definitely leave them out in the cold and without at least some kind of a hill from which to defend themselves, some kind of a little defense work to defend themselves. You're leaving them pretty open to attack, and a lot of those kids are going to crumble. So we didn't need it in our generation as nearly as much as they need it today.
Well, and is it really about evidence, Father, or is it about a deeper spiritual need? What do you think?
Well, there's both.
Right.
I mean, first of all of us have a deep spiritual need, right?
Yep.
Because God has made us for himself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in him. Now, that's no question. The numinous, the Spirit of God is dwelling within us, calling us, from the moment we're born. not just, the Spirit of God that we get at baptism, but God is present to us interiorly, calling us, fascinating us, riveting us to himself, right? And so there is an interior call, and there is an interior need. You can see that interior need. I mean, that last American Psychiatric Association study from Kanita Dervick and so forth, now that study showed, non-religiously affiliated people, why they have 3 times the amount of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, suicidal ideation, familial tensions, antisocial aggressivity, and suicides than religiously affiliated people.
Right.
So obviously, we have a strong interior need for God. And if we don't find God, we're going to be pretty depressed and anxious and even suicidal. Yeah. I mean, that's the findings, not of, the Bob Spitzer Society, but that's the findings of the American Psychiatric Association. And the second thing is we also need evidence. We live in a hypercritical secular culture that really puts a lot of quote-unquote faith in science. And so, credibility is invested in scientific method and scientific investigation and in just rational investigation, whether it be in the historical, philosophical disciplines, right? We live in a society that wants evidence. And, again, to just say, oh, you don't need evidence. Oh, when I was a child, young man, oh, I heard this many times. God's a mystery. Don't have to worry about it. You don't need evidence. Hold a baby. Then you'll know God exists. It's a miracle. It doesn't work for any analytical kid. So, I mean, about half your kids out there are going to be analytically oriented. Mm-hmm. And those kids, they need it. And if you don't give it to them, you just say, oh, I didn't need it. And it's not going to work for them. You leave them out there, and they're going to follow the culture because they're just going to think, well, mom's naive, dad's naive, I mean, I got to have some evidence. Now, luckily for me, I was one of those kids who needed it, but eventually God led me to where I needed to go. Right. And so that was, I did hear the evidence, piecemeal, but in an unconcerted way. And that's why, I started Maja Center, just to make this evidence available to anybody who wants it. And that's why we developed the Maja's AI app, to answer all those questions for anybody who needs it. And we don't want to, there's so much information. God has given us so much evidence. We don't need to be telling people anymore, you don't need evidence. If they need evidence, they need evidence. So some people do, some people don't, but you can't tell the ones that do, you don't need it. And so, at the end of the day, they can get it. And so our whole mission at Majas, the whole mission is to just make it available.
Yes.
And so, we're hoping, that this will be, in the end result, a way of at least helping kids maintain their faith, if not defend their faith. And they can go down, the rabbit hole of Majas AI way deep. They want like whole proofs, and they want, to know, the intelligibility of the Trinity and how you make sense out of it. You want to know about morality and why doesn't transgenderism make any sense? You can get the answers to any of those questions.
That's fantastic.
So we give about,
I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be a wonderful resource for me too. And speaking of evidence, let's talk about the Shroud of Turin, Father. I know that you've written extensively about it. You've studied it extensively. Briefly say what the Shroud is for those that might not know. And then let's talk about, from a scientific perspective, what do you see as the most compelling evidence that this is not a medieval forgery?
Sure. Well, first, the Shroud is a 14-foot by 3.5-foot purported burial cloth of Christ. I think the evidence points, 99% certainty this is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. Now, there's still the 0.1% because, any scientific truth, some mitigating factor can always be found. But in this particular case, I don't think it will be because you have a huge preponderance of evidence in favor of the Shroud. Now, the main thing to look at is, first of all, if you're analyzing well, let me describe the shroud a little bit further.
Okay.
You have an image on the shroud, which, by the way, has three-dimensional imaging on it, just like an MRI. So you can actually do depth studies, et cetera, and you can actually see, the inside of the body as well. So you can see, like, the interior backbone if you put it through a VP8 digital analyzer, and you analyze it according to its depth stages. You can actually see the backbone inside the shroud, the body, etc. So this is a very special image. It's sitting on the surface of the fibrils. No substance was used to produce this image. There's absolutely no substance on the shroud to produce it. It's literally emblazoned into the linen itself, and then it never reaches the middle of the fibers of the or the fibrils, or even the cloth. It just really on the uppermost surface of the cloth. So there's all these special features, which basically requires a very special burst of radiation to produce this image. A special burst of radiation, which would have to be supernatural in origin, because in order to produce that image, you're going to have definitely some form or source of radiation from fissioning or something else. But the point is it's not going to be a naturally caused image.
What did this discovery for you do for your scientific brain? And we'll go from there into the connection with the significance of the blood type and the congruence with modern Eucharistic miracles. But let's start with you as a scientist, and how that kind of brought things together for you.
Well, basically, I was in the novitiate when one of my friends basically came up to me. That's the beginning part of religious order training.
Right.
So, the very first part, I had just graduated from college and so forth. And he gave me Pierre Barbet's book, A Doctor at Calvary. And so I was looking at this book, and I thought, wow, this is really impressive, these studies. And so I began to think, well, maybe there's something to this shroud. Now, at the time, when I was in the novitiate, this is 1976, all the good stuff that had been done in the 1978 Stirp investigation, I was still basically I was going to go to philosophy at St. Louis University, and did do my philosophy and philosophy of science at St. Louis University. Great place. And while I was there, I did hear rumors about what was going on in the Shroud of Turin Research Project investigation with John Jackson and those guys. And I'm still in contact and communication with those guys today. But the main thing that's important is that I began to see, wow, this thing is passing every test. I mean, it's looking like, this could not possibly be a medieval forgery. Now, you probably know that in 1988, there was a carbon dating that was done. And, skipping my life for just a second, I'll get back to my life. But in 1988, a carbon dating was done. And that carbon dating dated the shroud to the Middle Ages. We now know that was reported very improperly, because the margins of error were actually, very overestimated by Damon, who published the studies, because what you can clearly see that the group was trying to cover up was that the fact that there was more than 2 standard deviations from the mean in an 8-centimeter sample. So, in this 8-centimeter sample, you basically have an age range from the part that's closest to the body, is about around 11, 14, and then going furthest away from the body is 1450, basically. And you look at that, or just reverse that, switch it around from closest to the furthest, and you just take a look at that for 1 second. You go, wait a minute, that's over 200 years in an 8-centimeter sample? How can that be right? Obviously, there's 2 standard deviations from the mean. And that generally means a glaring systematic error in the dating. And this was found, Dr. Tristan Casabianca and his crew, and Robert Rucker, in his subsequent investigation application of the Monte Carlo N particle software to the distribution problem of neutrons, et cetera. All these things have been found. Tom Phillips suggested right off the bat, neutrons could have done this. He's the Caltech guy, professor that came out and said, don't rush to conclusions here. There could have been neutrons, coming out that body. And of course, all of this was patently ignored. The stuff was published, glaring systematic error. Now we know that that it's been completely uncovered. You can see that when you use an ordinary standard statistical analysis, there is way too much heterogeneity in that 8-centimeter sample to even try to say that it was dated in the Middle Ages, let alone any other age. I mean, it took literally 29 years of Freedom of Information request to the British Museum to finally get the raw data from that carbon dating released. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. Now, of course, the cat's out of the bag. The carbon dating has been shown to have a systematic error, and which basically got covered up. And what are we going to do about it now? Well, everybody just says, well, wasn't that dated to the Middle Ages? So, the popular press is not putting this out. We as Catholics have to take all those scholarly articles that have been written subsequently, Tom Phillips and Robert Rucker and, all the people who've been doing, this analysis, and get those translated into articles. Well, I do that in my books, and I try to do it also in a Montage AI app. But the point is very clear. We've got to get this done, got to get the real material out there so that these kids can know, hey, there's been 4 other dating tests that have been done that are non-carbon related. And the reason why carbon dating will never do is that if there was a strong neutron emission from the body, which now we know there's a lot of evidence that there was a neutron emission from the fluorescing of the cloth and a variety of other things. But if they did have a strong neutron emission from the body, we have to remember that, that the nitrogen, isotope, it basically, you can take that N14 that's in the cloth, and there's a ton of N14 in a linen cloth, right? It's made of cellulose. There's nitrogen in it, and nitrogen isotope in it. So this N14 that's in the cloth, you bombard N14 with neutrons, and guess what you get? C14, carbon 14. What is measured in a carbon 14 dating test? Carbon 14. So a neutron emission will turn the N14, right? N14 plus neutron equals C14 plus proton. So essentially, you're going to create an abundance of carbon 14 in that cloth. Now, once you do that, you're going to make that cloth look a lot younger, right? Because you're just restoring all the carbon, right? It's a deterioration of the carbon that you're trying to measure in a C14. Now you're going to put a whole bunch of carbon 14 back in the cloth. It's going to look like a younger age. Now, that's exactly what happened. And right now, we have so much evidence of that neutron emission from different sources. I mean, we always wondered why, hey, how come those blood stains? It's like over 130 blood stains on that cloth, right? Mm-hmm. You look at that and you go, how come they're bright red? Because blood in open air turns from bright red to basically dark red, basically to brown, and then eventually to black. Mm-hmm. Now, how come we don't see a lot of dark brown and black blood stains on the shroud? Well, if you bombard blood with neutrons and then expose it to ultraviolet light, guess what? They all turn bright red. Oh. So we begin to see neutrons everywhere. So the point that is that this thing now with all the wide angle X-ray scattering test, that's one of the big tests that came out. It dates the shroud to between 54 to 75 AD. And then you've got the Fourier transformed infrared spectroscopy, the Raman laser spectroscopy, and the mechanical compressibility and tension test. None of them measure for C14. They measure, it might be included very slightly, but basically you can weight those measurements around it. And every single one of those 4 non-carbon dating tests, they evaluate the shroud. They test the shroud to the mid-1st century AD.
That's amazing.
And, of course, the pollen fossils indicate northern Judea and Jerusalem as the origin of the shroud.
Yeah, that's
so,
amazing.
I mean, we're talking time of Jesus.
Yes.
So,
yes,
anyway.
take it back to that.
Did that affect me? Yes.
Yes, it did. It sounds like it answered your questions and then some more. If you're just tuning in, this is Ellen White with FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Father Spitzer about scientific signs of the supernatural in the modern age. And we are grateful for our show's sponsor, Thales College. Wow, it's so incredible. And, you know, the blood type and the congruence with modern Eucharistic miracles. Why don't you draw that significance for us, Father?
Right. Well, there's a lot of contemporary Eucharistic miracles, that have come out, and they're very persuasive, I would say, too, with the younger people, because, again, you have some really good scientifically investigated evidence that there is living heart tissue growing out of consecrated hosts. And the living heart tissue that's growing out of those hosts is, it's from the upper left ventricle. You can actually see active macrophages white blood cells, leukocytes, that are actively working inside this tissue. And that means that the tissue has to be alive. And it's indisputably cardiac tissue. In some cases, you can detect it morphologically. You can see the striations in the tissue. In some cases, you can't detect it morphologically, but you can see it through the elongated contraction nodes in the cells, that would indicate a cell particular to the heart tissue. But in any case, the point is, we know it's heart tissue. We know that it's living heart tissue because in one case, we can actually, in the Tixla, Mexico case from 2006, we can actually not only see living white blood cells, we can see living red blood cells in the blood that is emitting from the host. So you can see this very, very clearly. You can also see in the Sepulchre host. What's most interesting is that there is, a connection. These are two vastly different substances that are interconnected, right? So on the one hand, you've got this, cardiac tissue, living cardiac tissue. On the other hand, you've got the substance of crushed bread, essentially, in bread molecules. I'll just call it for simplicity's sake. And you've got an interconnection between these two vastly different substances, one alive, one that's not alive, and they're connected on the level of the thin filaments of the myofibrils. Now, what does that mean? That means they're super refined, super intertwined with only a few microns, like cell lengths of separation between the vastly integrated parts. As Dr. Elizabeth Lutkowska and Dr. Stanislaw Sulkowski very well published histopathological experts who did the electron microscopy, the electron microscopic analysis on the tissue and the host. They'll tell you outright, we don't have any technology in the world today that can possibly reproduce or replicate what we are seeing under electron microscopic analysis in the Sepulchre host. It's just not humanly possible to produce. And obviously, having living heart tissue growing out of the substance of a consecrated host is not naturalistically explicable. I mean, it's completely inexplicable from a naturalistic scientific point of view. Yeah. And that's why we can, say with some degree of confidence, it's a miracle. I mean, you're going to need a supernatural cause to produce this kind of effect.
Here we go again with a supernatural cause. And, I'm wondering, Father, I'm obviously familiar with Lanciano and, Buenos Aires. You talked a little bit in my research. I've recognized that you've talked a little bit about that. How many Eucharistic miracles are we talking about where there's this consecrated host that under, I guess, a microscope and it's bleeding is heart tissue? How many are we talking about, would you say?
Well, right now, there's a lot of Eucharistic miracles.
Okay.
And Carlos Acutis,
Yep.
Who's
Been canonized.
Canonization coming up pretty soon. And he, of course, cataloged many of them. We have a person in India who's cataloged many of them, along with a Eucharistic host in India. So when you're dealing with that catalog, it's pretty vast.
Okay.
Now, when you get into what I'm just going to call the Spitzerian catalog, that's where we have really good signed lab reports of every layer of the scientific investigation. Now, I'm just going to talk about three of them now. Lanciano did have a scientific, an excellent scientific study done on that miracle. And by the way, that's a 1,400-year-old miracle. It took place in 800 AD, right, to a monk there in Italy, in San Lanciano. Now, the main thing, though, is Dr. Eduardo Linoli, who is a very fine histopathological expert. He did do some tests on the Lanciano miracle, but you have two problems. You're always going to have the problem of chain of custody, because when you get something that's 1,400 years old and you didn't have people recording the whole chain of custody, it's really, really hard to say, with scientific precision. You could say, I trust the people who said that, and so I believe it, which is, in fact, what I do. I do trust the people who said this, but unfortunately for a scientist, the scientists go, well, wait a minute, you say there's no chain of custody? Then how do we know that people didn't try to alter this in some way, or try to add to this in some way, or try to do something in some way? I mean, we got to know, who had it and what they did and things of that nature. So the Lanciano one, even though it's a really interesting host, and by the way, the Lanciano host does have blood. Of course, it's super dehydrated now, right? It's super, reduced, in size and weight. But Linoli did excellent testing on it. It is AB blood type, all right. And not only is it AB blood type, but you can actually see some remnants of what we might call human whole blood. Now, all that is, to say, is that going to count for a scientist as a signed lab report? No, I think it's good enough, though, for a scientifically oriented, faith-filled Catholic to say, hey, that gives me enough for reasonable and responsible belief. Now, if you really want to have something that's more science-oriented, you are going to have a chain of custody. By the way, Linoli showed in the Lanciano miracle that there was no preservative added. So that's a very good thing. So that helps. But it's not going to give what you might call satisfaction to a scientist who really does want an established chain of custody, wants to know what happened to the thing that's being observed from minute to minute, practically. And we want to know what went wrong. We need the signed lab reports that tell exactly what kinds of tests were performed on it, et cetera. So that's normal scientific procedure, methodology, that careful study, and that's can be found in three different Eucharistic miracles. One of them is definitely the Buenos Aires miracle that you mentioned. This happened in 1996 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. By the way, the supervising bishop at that time was Archbishop Bergoglio, who became, of course, Pope Francis. And so he was involved in that investigation, and he was the one that actually ordered that the original photographs be taken, which proved, that the what we call, the disorganization, the disordering of the tissue was very, very minimal. That's called autolysis. But essentially, the tissue coming out of the host experienced very little autolysis, and the host itself in water did not completely decompose. It's utterly bizarre. I mean, normally if you put a host in water for a few days, it's gonzo, right? It's just going to disappear into the water, and then you take the water and you pour it in directly into the ground, in a normal way of, if you have a contaminated host that, needs to be dealt with respectfully. So the main thing, though, is, this did not happen to the Buenos Aires host. You had people like Frederick Zugby, who was a first-class histopathologist, wrote many books on the subject. Columbia University, New York pathological labs, and so forth. He was the one that identified for sure that there was white blood cells, leukocytes, that were actively working the tissue of the Buenos Aires host, which, of course, that implies already that the tissue is alive, because how could there be living white blood cells, which normally die in any tissue that's disconnected from an embodied circulatory system, right? Within like 3 hours, those white blood cells would all be dead. Yet there they are. Like 5 years later, they're zooming around, actively phagocytizing lipids in the tissue, and right under the microscope you can see it, but the tissue is disconnected from an embodied circulatory system. I mean, when Zugby said, you must have taken this right away from a person's beating heart, right? In other words, he's saying, did you torture this guy and then, slice some tissue, or where'd this come from anyway? And so Dr. Castellan Gomez said, well, we got it from a Eucharistic host. And he was just flummoxed. He could not believe that sample had come from tissue growing out of a Eucharistic host. And he just sat there for about 5 minutes and finally said, well, that's naturalistically impossible. And there you go, because, of course, how can you have living heart tissue that's been disconnected from an embodied circulatory system for over 5 years, still, as it were, functioning as living tissue that can sustain white blood cells? It's just a paradox. And by the way, those white blood cells at Buenos Aires, they were embedded in the cell walls and in the walls of the ventricle, which means that obviously that heart had been beaten on, right? In other words, the tissue that came from that heart had been tortured or punched or something that would have caused some challenges or some deterioration in the cell walls and in the
which totally correlates with Christ's passion, which is so incredible.
Passion.
So in addition to Buenos Aires, what are the other two, Father? Quickly, because we're running out of time.
Tixla, Mexico in 2006.
How do you spell that? I'm wondering.
Tixtla.
Okay.
Tixla, Mexico.
Okay.
And that's a 2006. It's over. There's a lot of books on this. My book, was on. I'm sorry, Christ, Science, and Reason.
Yes.
By Ignatius Press. I've got a whole chapter on that, and I spent half of a chapter on just Tixla. It's so fascinating. Then the last one is 2008 in Sokolka, Poland. That's where the electron microscopy was done by Lukowska and Suklowski. Again, two very good histopathologists. Suklowski has a publication record. He's a great scholar unto himself, scientist unto himself, and a very reputable person. Some of these Communist Party hacks tried to say, he's just one of these Christians, trying to put out his propaganda. And Suklowski took them all on. The guy's great. Lukowska did too. So anyway, the long and the short of it is that's where you can actually show through the electron microscopy that no human technology or natural cause could have produced the effect that we see in the Sokolka host.
With the one in Poland, what year was that, Father?
2008.
Okay. So
2008. So that's Sokolska.
Okay. Wow.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah. And there's so many, parallels with all of these Eucharistic miracles and Christ's passion and his suffering and heart tissue. I mean, isn't it just like him to give us his heart completely? To show us his love. Now, let me ask you this question.
No doubt.
I wonder, can a skeptic believe in these miracles without believing in God yet?
Well, I think, the first thing, I think there's a natural ordering to things. If you want to get to the skeptic, first get to the God question, then to the Jesus question. Then when you get to the Eucharistic miracles, it becomes easy. But I think there's so much evidence for God. I just tell, the brute skeptics, now you've got, for example, in these near-death experiences, right? You've got the New York Academy of Sciences in 2022 basically saying there's a very credible possibility that your consciousness is going to survive your bodily death based on like 32 peer-reviewed medical studies of near-death experiences. It's getting real hard to deny that you have a soul body that's going to leave your physical body, a few seconds after, let's say, you have a heart attack or something, and that soul body is going to be able to see and to hear and to think, recall, remember, will have emotion, self-consciousness, and of course, at the same time, can pass through walls. It's no longer restricted by the structures, physical processes and structures and their laws in the physical world. So it could go through walls, defy gravity, etc. So, if you put that out there and then talk about that otherworldly domain, this heavenly domain that a lot of people go to, with the loving white light, and 18% of the heavenly domain experiences involve Jesus Christ, in bodily Jesus Christ. So you look at that, you put the stuff together, and what you're doing is you kind of form a little bridge there. Well, maybe there is a God. And then, of course, you can go through the formal proofs of God, and then the new cosmological evidence that's out there with Stephen Hawking and all those guys that are now switching over. No wonder, 51% of scientists overall today believe in God. Only 21% are agnostic and 20% atheists. But it's the young scientists. In the last Pew survey of the American Association for Advancement of Science, 66% of the young scientists declared themselves believers. Only 15% agnostic, 15% atheists. So at the end of the day, things are switching, in favor of theism. And the reason is because the evidence is overwhelming. And then, when you get to the God thing, and people go, well, maybe there is a reasonable and responsible method for ascertaining from a scientific as well as a philosophical point of view the existence of God. Well, then you can sort of say, well, have you ever thought of, the heart of God? Yeah, we can prove that God is unique and unrestricted and uncaused and is a continuous creator of all else that is. That's a really good thing to know. And in Lonergan's proof, you can even prove that God is, not only uncaused and unrestricted and unique, but an unrestricted act of understanding itself. So you look at that and you go, wow, but it's all the what's about God, the powers of God. But then you have to get to who is God? Does he love you? Does he hate you? Right? Does he? Is he indifferent to you? Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? If there is a heaven, how do I get there? If there's a hell, how do I avoid it? Right? Does God have any moral preferences? Does he protect us? Does he guide us? Does he inspire us? Does he give us some sense of who he is in his own revelation? So you got to lead, a person who's been obsessed about the existence of God and what God is. You've got to get them over to the who God is, right? The heart of God. And that's going to take God's self-revelation. And that's how you can move them to Jesus Christ. And the one thing to do right from the get-go is to make sure they know Jesus is different from any other, claimed revelation of God, in the respect of the fact that he claims God is unrestricted law. And that, the father of the prodigal son is his image of who God the Father is in his heart. Now, once you see the primacy of love in Christ's revelation of his Father and himself, right? Once you see that, as primary, and then you just say, okay, what kind of historical evidence can we get for Jesus' resurrection? And there is a lot of good historical evidence without making recourse to the shroud. There's a ton of good historical evidence from what we call the third quest for the historical Jesus, the N.T. Wright, the John T. Myers, the Richard Bauckham's, etc., that are out there who put together a really excellent historical, exegetical, evidential base for Jesus. And then you move right into the Shroud of Turin, with that scientific investigation for what produced that image, and then you see writ large on the bloodstains of the shroud, you can see every single aspect in the gospel narratives about the unique crucifixion of Jesus. You put all that stuff together, and I'm telling you, you can make a really strong case for a skeptic that everything Jesus said about the love of God, the love of neighbor, who God is as an unrestricted, loving God, who he is, and his total self-sacrificial love on the cross to redeem the world, it's really true. And once you can get them to that, then, of course, the Eucharist is the greatest gift Christ ever gave us, because it's a gift of himself. And so the basic thing is to get that across. If you have to use Eucharistic miracles, why not use them? There's good historical, exegetical evidence for the reality of Christ in the Eucharist, but why not use the Eucharistic miracles? And then once you have that, you've got to move them to practice, right? So what you want to do is get them to go to church, to worship God, to thank the Lord for giving us the gift of life and the protection from evil and darkness, etc.
So beautiful, and it really lays the groundwork for a very strong faith life. Okay, so we've talked about, my gosh, the Shroud of Turin, Eucharistic miracles, faith and reason. You announced that you've got this amazing app, AI app, Magis AI app that's coming out sometime this month. Father Spitzer, any just brief closing thoughts, maybe where our listeners can go to get some more information about the app and whatever else you've got going on at the Magis Center? Sure.
Right. We're going to have a big campaign going, but go to our website, magiscenter.com. That's spelled MAGIS center.com. So just go to our website and take a look at the, we'll have a big announcement about the Magis AI app, which is coming out. You just go to Google Play Store or Apple Store, or whatever your device is, and just download it. It's free of charge. And just start, there's like 30 sample questions and the areas of science and reason and evidence for God and for Jesus, for the Eucharist, et cetera, that all there you can get, will a multiverse disprove God? Will a God particle disprove God? All the answers to those questions. You can get, spiritual questions. Why does the church teach against transgender? Is transgenderism, bad for emotional health? Whatever. All those questions you can get it answered in a heartbeat. The same. Any moral issue you want, it should be covered there. And then you also will have, as possibility. Other kinds of questions about the confluence between those things. Thank you so much. And it's magiscenter.com, MAGIS center.com. Can you leave us with a blessing, Father? Absolutely. Okay. Bow your heads and pray for God's blessing. And may the Lord of all consolation, the Lord of all love, the Lord of all power, the master of the universe, the intelligence who is love and beauty and goodness of not just the universe, but of all reality, come down through his Holy Spirit and bless you and fill you with his wisdom and love. In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you so much, Father Spitzer. God bless. We live in a world that constantly demands evidence, but God, in his mercy, has given us more than enough to stir both the mind and the heart, from the mysterious image on the Shroud of Turin to the living tissue found in consecrated hosts. These signs don't replace faith, but they do point to a reality far deeper than what science alone can explain. A huge thank you to Father Spitzer for helping us navigate the mystery with clarity, courage, and conviction. If today's conversation sparked something in you, curiosity, wonder, maybe even a little awe, lean into it. These aren't just relics of the past. They're invitations to encounter the living God today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who's asking questions or someone who needs to remember that God is closer than they think. And if you missed any part of this episode or want to catch up on past conversations filled with inspiration and hope, you can find them at divinemercyradio.org. Just click on local shows. And don't forget, you can take FaithWorks with you wherever you go. Just download the Divine Mercy Radio app from your app store. Simply search Divine Mercy Radio NC, and you're all set to listen anytime, anywhere
Until next time, keep living your faith boldly because faith works. God bless.